All stories on this channel are original content, fully protected by copyright and intellectual property laws. Any unauthorized copying, re-uploading, narration, or use of these stories will be considered copyright infringement and may lead to serious legal consequences. These stories are exclusively owned by this channel. Respect the rights or face legal action.
This story was sent to me by one of my subscribers, Emily Parker, and I wanted to share it on the channel. It was back in 2015 when I decided to take a solo road trip to a forest a few hours from home. There was an old abandoned fire lookout hidden deep in the woods that I had always wanted to explore. I should mention that entering or camping inside it was technically illegal since it hadn't been maintained for years and was considered structurally unstable. Still, I had read a few old posts online from people who said it seemed fine, though the most recent one was from about 3 years earlier. I had no idea what condition it would be in when I got there. I parked my car in a small ditch off the side of the road, grabbed my backpack with 2 days' worth of gear, and began the long hike. There wasn't a clear trail, so I used a handheld satellite GPS to guide me. For the next several hours, I pushed through dense, uneven terrain, hoping the lookout would still be standing and safe enough to sleep in. After 4 or 5 exhausting hours, I finally spotted it rising above the trees. Up close, it looked surprisingly intact. The paint was gone and the wood was weathered, but the structure seemed solid. I tested the support beams and they held firm. The metal ladder creaked with every step, but it felt sturdy enough to climb. When I reached the top, I was struck by the view. From up there, I could see the entire forest stretching endlessly in every direction. No roads, no houses, just wilderness. Inside, the lookout was small, maybe 150 square feet. There was an old rotting bed frame in one corner and a decaying wooden desk in another. The windows, though cracked and grimy, wrapped around the entire room. I set down my bag, rolled out my sleeping gear, and cooked a quick meal on my camping stove. As the sun began to set, I stepped outside to watch it disappear behind the trees. The view was breathtaking, but once the light faded, the forest was swallowed in total darkness. It was cloudy, too, so there was no moon or stars to help. I stayed out on the ledge for a while, enjoying the eerie silence. Then, about an hour later, I noticed something strange below. A flickering orange light moving among the trees. It didn't look like a flashlight. It glowed and wavered, like a torch or a small fire. The idea of someone else being out there in such a remote place seemed almost impossible. There wasn't even a proper trail leading here. And who would be wandering around at night using a torch instead of a flashlight? I watched as the light moved slowly through the trees, then disappeared behind something. I waited another 30 minutes, but it never reappeared. Eventually, I brushed it off and stayed on the ledge a bit longer before deciding to head inside. Just as I stood up, I looked down and froze. Someone was standing at the bottom of the lookout tower. They were motionless, facing straight up at me. It was too dark to see their face, but I could tell they were watching me. "Hello?" I called down. No answer. We just stood there, staring at each other for maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Then, without a word, they slowly raised one hand, almost like a wave or an apology, before turning and walking back into the woods. No flashlight, no torch, nothing. Just darkness. I should have been terrified, but in the moment, I convinced myself it was another hiker. Maybe they'd come to stay in the lookout and realized someone was already inside. I stayed outside for a few more minutes, then went in and zipped myself into my sleeping bag, trying to shake off the unease. The wind rattled the windows and made the wood creak beneath me, but eventually, I fell asleep. I don't know how long I slept before something woke me. The wind had stopped, and everything was silent. Except for one sound, a faint, metallic creak coming from outside. It was the ladder. I held my breath, hoping I was imagining it, but then I heard it again. And again. Someone was climbing. The sound grew louder, faster, as if whoever it was had realized I was awake and was hurrying. My heart pounded. I unzipped my sleeping bag, grabbed my backpack, and crept toward the door. Just as I stepped onto the ledge, the creaking stopped. I stood there in total silence, trying to listen over the pounding in my ears. Then I slowly moved along the narrow walkway and peered around the corner toward the ladder. No one was there. I leaned over the edge and looked down. Empty. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, and then I heard footsteps, fast, heavy, circling around the other side of the lookout. Someone was up there with me. I caught a glimpse of a dark figure darting past one of the windows, and that was all I needed to see. I grabbed the railing and started climbing down the ladder as fast as I could. My hands were shaking, the metal was slick with moisture, and I could hear the footsteps above getting closer. Halfway down, I glanced up and saw a head leaning over the edge, looking straight at me. I didn't stop. I just kept climbing until my feet hit the ground. Then I ran. Through the trees, the brush, the darkness. I don't even remember how long I ran, but somehow, using my flashlight and GPS, I found my way back to the road and my car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sped away without ever looking back. To this day, I don't know who or what that was up there with me, and I don't ever plan to find out. Thank you to Emily Parker for sending this terrifying story. If you have a story, send it in, and it might be featured next.
This story was sent to me by one of my subscribers, Sarah Mitchell, and I wanted to share it on the channel. I'm a 24-year-old woman from northern Arizona, and this happened a couple of years ago. At the time, I was living out of a small camper van, traveling along the West Coast. People live all sorts of different lifestyles in vans and RVs like mine. Personally, I preferred to avoid big cities and stick to small towns or backcountry spots in between destinations. There was something peaceful and strangely comforting about being completely alone in the woods. I always felt safer out there than stealth camping in a city parking lot. Sure, the forest could be eerie at night, but at least I knew no one was nearby. That week, I was slowly making my way between two major cities in Washington, taking my time and camping along back roads for a few days at a time. One afternoon, I turned off onto a narrow dirt trail that wound deep into the forest. I passed a few pull-off spots, but none were occupied, and it didn't look like anyone had been there for weeks. Eventually, the trail ended in a large circular clearing surrounded by tall trees. It wasn't exactly scenic, but it was secluded and peaceful, and even had a stone fire ring in the center. I leveled out my van and parked. Since it was spring, the Washington rain hadn't let up in days. I opened the side door for some fresh air while cooking a meal on my small propane stove. It was around sunset. The forest dim and quiet except for the steady patter of rain on the leaves. About 30 minutes later, the rain started coming down harder, so I shut the door to keep the water out and cracked one of the small back windows for ventilation. I sat on my bed and started watching a show on my laptop. Halfway through the episode, a glare suddenly appeared across my screen, light reflecting through the window behind me. Before I could react, the light vanished. Not moved away, just turned off. I turned and looked out the window, but saw nothing. The forest was completely dark, rain pouring down in sheets. I couldn't tell how far away the light had been or what it came from. My first thought was that it might have been another camper, maybe headlights from a vehicle shining through the trees before they turned them off. But that didn't make sense. The light hadn't come from the trail behind me. Behind my van was nothing but dense forest. Still, I brushed it off. There wasn't much I could do about it anyway. I turned back to my laptop, trying not to think about it. Every once in a while, I thought I heard something outside. Branches cracking or soft movement. But the rain hitting the metal roof made it impossible to tell. Each time I looked, I saw nothing. Eventually, around 10 or 11, I decided to call it a night. I turned off my lights, closed all the windows, and drew to shades. The van was nearly pitch black inside. Normally, I could fall asleep easily, but not that night. The rain grew heavier, and thunder rolled through the mountains, shaking the van. 2 hours later, through the noise of the storm, I heard something else. A sound that didn't belong. It was faint but clear.
Someone running outside. The footsteps were quick, followed by the sharp crack of a branch snapping underfoot. I froze, staring toward the covered window. I couldn't see anything, but the longer I stared, the more I felt it, that gut-deep sense that someone was standing out there, looking right back at me. I slowly lowered the window cover again and sat in silence, my heart pounding. Then I heard it. A voice. A man's voice, low, almost a whisper, but loud enough to cut through the rain. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but it sounded like he was talking to someone else. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there under my blanket, terrified to even shift my weight in case they could hear me. After a few long minutes, the voice stopped. The forest grew silent again, except for the storm. Then, suddenly, there was a soft thud on the side of the van. The side door. It sounded like someone was leaning against it, pressing into the metal. Then came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze, too afraid to respond. A few seconds passed, and then they knocked again. Whoever they were, they already knew someone was inside. That made it even worse. I stayed perfectly still, praying they'd just leave, but they didn't. The knocking continued, soft, slow, every few seconds. Then a deep voice spoke again. "Sheriff's Department. You need to open up." My blood ran cold. If that were true, why hadn't they said it from the beginning? Why sneak around the van in the dark knocking like that? They kept repeating variations of the same line. "Sheriff's Department, you need to open the door." Each time it sounded less official and more desperate, like someone trying to convince me they were something they weren't. I slowly lifted one corner of the window cover and peered out. Through the sheets of rain, I could barely make out a dark figure standing beside the van. He didn't have a uniform or badge, no flashlight, no visible car or emergency lights nearby. That's when I knew this was not law enforcement. My mind raced, trying to decide what to do. The knocking grew impatient. Then I heard another voice, further away but closer than before. There was more than one of them. I had no choice. I crawled into the driver's seat, started the engine, and shifted into drive. Instantly, I heard 2 sets of footsteps splashing through the mud, running toward the van. As I pulled forward, one of them slammed into the side door, and I caught a glimpse of a face in the rain, pale, expressionless, eyes wide. But I didn't stop. I floored it, fishtailing through the mud until I reached the main dirt trail. I drove as fast as the van could handle, rain blurring my vision and my hands shaking uncontrollably on the wheel. When I finally reached the highway, I looked back. There were no headlights behind me, no signs of another vehicle at all. The next morning, I filed a report with the county sheriff's office. They confirmed that no deputies had been dispatched to that area that night. Whoever those people were, they weren't cops. And to this day, I have no idea what they wanted or what might have happened if I'd opened that door. Thank you to Sarah Mitchell for sending this terrifying story. If you have a story, send it in, and it might be featured next.
This story was sent to me by one of my subscribers, Daniel Brooks, and I wanted to share it on the channel. I was camping at a small lake for the weekend. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a few days in the woods by the water to relax and clear my head. The first day went perfectly. I arrived, set up my tent, made a small fire, and spent the rest of the day just taking in the quiet. The lake was in the middle of nowhere, accessible only by a thin footpath that wasn't marked on any maps. It was the kind of hidden spot only locals knew about. My dad used to bring me here when I was a kid, and in all those years, whether with him or on my own, I had never once seen another person there. Not a single footprint, tire track, or empty can. Nothing. On the second day, I spent hours walking around the lake, circling it over and over. Everything was peaceful and silent. But during one of those laps, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. They were pressed clearly into the dirt near the tree line. Fresh, unmistakable, and completely barefoot. Not shoe prints, just bare, human feet. I had walked the same path 3 or 4 times that day, and those prints definitely hadn't been there before. It didn't make sense. The lake didn't have any easy access to the water, and if someone had been swimming, I would have seen them. The more I looked, the worse it felt. The footprints came out of the woods toward the lake, stopped near the edge as if someone had been watching, then turned and went straight back into the forest. That was enough for me. I didn't follow them. I just headed back to my campsite, constantly glancing around, half expecting to see someone standing at the tree line. But there was no one. As the sun started to set, the feeling of unease grew heavier. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a random hiker maybe, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. When night fell, I built up the fire and sat beside it, trying to calm my nerves. The crackling wood was the only sound in the dark, and I did everything I could to keep my mind occupied. But at some point, I heard something that froze me where I sat. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the trees. More than one pair. I turned toward the sound, my heart pounding as 2 figures emerged from the darkness. A man and a woman stepped just into the edge of the firelight and stopped. I couldn't see their faces, only the outline of their bodies. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. The woman suddenly turned and bolted back into the woods, vanishing completely. But the man didn't move. He just stood there, silent and still. That's when I looked down and saw that he was barefoot. He didn't answer when I spoke again. He just slowly turned around and walked back into the trees. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing. The whole thing didn't feel real, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Then reality hit me. I needed to leave. I started packing up immediately. My campsite was small, and within minutes I had everything stuffed into my backpack. I kicked apart the firewood to let it burn out, then grabbed my flashlight and started the long walk back to my truck. The trail was about 2 hours through dense forest. For the first 10 minutes, every sound made me jump. But after a while, things got quiet again. Too quiet. Not even the crickets were chirping. Then, somewhere off to my right, I heard it. Running footsteps. They were fast, light, and definitely human. I shined my flashlight, but the beam cut through nothing but trees. I tried to keep walking, faster now, my pulse hammering in my ears. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, on my left. Closer. It sounded like someone sprinting barefoot through the undergrowth, then stopping abruptly. The silence after each burst of running was somehow worse than the sound itself. I don't know how long it went on like that. Short bursts of footsteps, circling me, keeping distance, but never too far. It was the most terrified I've ever been in my life. Eventually, through some miracle, I saw the faint glint of my truck's metal through the trees. I ran the last stretch without looking back, threw my gear in the back seat, and floored it out of there. I never figured out who that man and woman were, or what they were doing out there barefoot in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes I wonder if they were even alive. I've never gone back to that lake, and I never will.